بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. In light of the news, right, I think, this gives further, hopefully, clarity, and I don't think we need another reason, but the power of us collectively coming together as a community, bringing our resources, both intellectual and financial, will give us increasing power and influence, right? And so what's happening with CARE or other organizations is not going to be the last time. And so while this is not part of my prepared remarks, I think it is, salient in terms of given what's happening. And so inshallah, the focus of my conversation today with you is really around how do we grow our endowments, right? So a lot of the conversation has been, around very important pieces, right? Yesterday we got a lot of background in terms of the historical significance, the religious significance. We've talked about governance. We've talked about different investment strategies and things like that. But, one of the things that I would like to kind of help us step back and think about is, what is the point? What is the point of having an endowment, right? And it has to be more than just a really big account of money, right? It has to be more than, okay, we're just going to accumulate assets just to accumulate assets. The point is, right, as we've kind of talked about, it's really about how do we bring those assets, those money back into the community for the different programming and things that we have in mind in terms of our future, right? So that's kind of the point, right? And so as we think about, as an example, right, just to make this real, let's say a sample of masjid has a budget of 1.2 million in this example, right? Now, in order for you to be able to do anything with it, let's say you have an endowment with about $1 million. And so if you look at like different models in terms of endowment withdrawal, right? So you never want to withdraw all the money immediately. Typically they'll say between 3 and 5%. So let's say use 4% as our example. If you were to withdraw 4% from your endowment, you would have an annual distribution of about $40,000. So what does that mean, right? That means that $40,000 did not put a dent into your annual budget, right? So this kind of goes back to my original thing. Is like, what is the point of the endowment unless it has meaningful scale to be able to move the needle for our organizations, right? So we had a lot of discussion about, okay, hey, we need to grow these endowments and all that, but beyond just investments, how are we thinking about growing our endowments? Because specifically for what I would say our community endowments that are subscale, right? They're different from the Ford Foundation or the Princetons and the other universities that are already at scale in the hundreds or the billions of dollars, where the investment actually does matter a lot. But if we're talking about communities where we have $1, $2, $5, $10 million in our endowment accounts, what are the things that we really need to focus on in order to be able to move the needle that ultimately brings those dollars back into our community in a way that is meaningful? So these are just a few like hypothetical examples, right? Just to demonstrate the point. So in this example, there is a hypothetical endowment that started with $1 million. It grows at 8% per year, and the community in this example is withdrawing 4% from that endowment on an annual basis. And so by year 20, that endowment has doubled in value, right? Close to $2 million. And during that time, it has given back about $1.2 million in cumulative distributions to that community. Now, if you looked at my previous slide, right, that $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in that hypothetical $1.2 million budget doesn't really move the needle, right? So what do we need to do? We need to grow. And how do we grow? Well, investment growth is one part of it, but if you're starting with a small base, the big growth engine is new contributions, right? And so again, in this example, all the same previous assumptions with one caveat, which is it's assuming an additional $500,000 a year adjusted for inflation for the same duration. And the difference is significant, right? As you would imagine, right? Instead of ending at a year-end or 20-year balance of $2 million, you're at almost $20 million in terms of where your endowment is. But more important than the $20 million number is what are you able to bring back into the community in terms of those distributions? Because at a $20 million level, now you're talking about, in this case, $800,000 in annual distributions. That is moving the needle for the community. That is allowing you to really think about, okay, well, what are the things that we can really invest in? We know that we can invest in these new positions because we have a base of recurring income that's coming in beyond just the annual fundraisers and things that we're doing today. So what is the blueprint to get here, right? So the big question is, okay, Khalid, the math sounds great, right? You just have to just find $500,000, and how are we going to get there? And so the good news is that there is a plan, and these are opportunities where we can look at other communities, whether it's faith-based or non-faith-based communities, where they have successfully been able to grow their endowments. And when you look at endowments like a Princeton or like some of these major endowments out there, most of the growth early on comes from these major gifts and comes from these meaningful gifts. So if you have to think beyond just like the typical approach in terms of how we think about fundraising and really change the paradigm and look at what does best in class look like in terms of endowment growth. And so when we look at this blueprint, the first piece is the strategy, right? And so we've talked, there's different points that have been explained about strategy and how to think about strategy. But I would say that in the kind of the circles that you have here, typically most organizations, they're really good at annual contributions, right? That's the muscle that we've built over the last 30, 40, 50 years, right? Ramadan fundraisers, different fundraisers that we do. We have a budget of $1 million, $500,000. We are able to raise that money. We have monthly donations, Jummah donations, right? The second bucket we're good at too. We're doing an expansion of the masjid. We're repaving the parking lot. We're doing X, Y, Z. It is a capital improvement that we're doing. It is very tangible and people give to it. But the part that is typically viewed as, I would say, an afterthought is really around the endowment. And so in order for us to really move the needle in terms of bringing this to the forefront of our community, it has to be part of the core fundraising strategy. It cannot be an afterthought. And you have to also view it as something that is complementary and not cannibalistic. Because I hear this all the time. Brother, well, we are barely getting to our annual goals, or we have a new construction project. After that, inshallah, we'll start to think about the endowment. But that should not be the case. These are all things that can work complementary, and the way that you think about them and how you can make them complementary is how you fundraise for different aspects. And so I'll kind of go into a little bit deeper in terms of how we want to think about, from a fundraising perspective, how do you unlock, in that previous example, that extra $500,000 a year, and where does it come from? Before you do that, you've got to align as a board in a community. And so one of the things that, I'll have conversations with different masjids, schools, etc., and they'll say, Brother Khalid, we want an endowment, right? Because if you ask anyone, do you want an endowment? Everyone says, yes, we want an endowment. And the question I have is, well, what is the purpose of your endowment? Well, we just want an endowment. And so one of the things I think was mentioned by previous speakers as well is having a clear understanding of what is the purpose of this endowment. It's not about moving more money into a bank account. It's really about what does the future of this organization look like, and how do we inspire our donors to show them that we have a vision that's beyond just the operating expenses, but really putting into perspective of what are we really doing here and what is the purpose of our organization, whether it's a masjid or school or relief organization. Every one of these organizations has a unique story to tell, and it is incredibly important when we think about the endowment, when we present it to the community, that we're putting it in that context of what is the ultimate goal and being very focused about that, right? What is this endowment going to do and why are we doing it? The second part on this strategy is who do we want to focus on, right? So, in like a typical like corporate sales speak, there's a strategy that people call spray and pray. It's like you shoot a big gun and you just pray that it hits someone and we get something, right? And so when you want to be more strategic about how you think about your endowment, you also want to think about who are you talking to and how are you talking to them and when are you talking to them and what are you presenting in front of them. And so one of the models that we've used, successfully, and if you look at other endowment programs that have grown significantly, is that They look at different segments of their stakeholders or their donor populations or their congregants in a way that allows them to then focus their conversations in a way that would be most meaningful for that group of people. So, and each bucket here is not, mutually exclusive, right? Someone could be a major donor and also a recurring donor. But the idea is, as an organization, you start to think about, okay, who are the people that I want to talk to? And most organizations, as I've seen it, usually know off the top of your head who is my number 1, 2, 3, 5, top 10 family member or families that are supporting me, right? But the way that we engage them is often very similar to the way that you're engaging everyone else. And so there are opportunities for us to really think about how we want to engage different groups differently, such that it has a more meaningful, it resonates in a more meaningful way. And so that leads to the biggest part of this conversation, which is about education, right? So most people get the strategy. Hey, we need to do this. We need to align. We have a clear purpose on what we need to do. We kind of know who we need to go after. Now, what do we do next? How do we educate the community in a way that allows us to effectively engage them so that they understand the opportunity? And if they understand the opportunity, inshallah, they will step up to the task. And so if we go back, and there's a lot on this slide, so I'll just kind of highlight some of the key points here, right? So this is using the same buckets as the pyramid, right? So the different groups of people, the legacy donors, the major donors, and what have you. There are different actions that you should be taking with different groups, right? And so this is, as you think about the blueprint, what are some of the things that organizations do when they engage a major donor versus maybe a smaller donor in the beginning in terms of how do you want to talk about your endowment, right? And so in some cases for, let's say, a major donor or a legacy donor being someone that is really thinking about their estate, that may be towards the end of their life, and they're really being thoughtful about how do I leave a meaningful portion of my assets and create impact after I'm gone, right? And so those are opportunities where, for example, in that case, where you may want to have an estate planning session for those folks, right? You bring in an attorney, you talk about wills and bequests and how to do that. For a major donor, there might be one-on-one Q&As that you do or small listening sessions that you want to do. And so there's different strategies that you will want to employ depending on who the person is. And just for your benefit, after this, I'll also make some available. We have a full blueprint on how you can do this. It's available to anyone that wants it. So we'll share that as well, inshallah. But as we go through, just so that you know that. Okay, now I know, here are the people that I want to talk to, and I generally know the format of how I want to engage with them. Now I got to show them something, right? And so this is where, as a community, you start to have to create bespoke collateral that specifically calls out your endowment, right? So again, when I go on most websites or different organizations or look at their collateral, first of all, they usually, if they have an endowment, it's usually not very mentioned very clearly or prominently. But even if someone wants to engage meaningfully on the endowment, there usually isn't a lot of supporting material. It's more like, hey, we have an endowment, trust us, and then inshallah we'll maybe report it on in the annual meeting. And so if you look at best-in-class endowments that are actually growing, one of the key things that they have is they have great content and transparency around what's happening. So it's not just, hey, I have a presentation around our endowment and what our broader goals are and what we're trying to accomplish, but there is consistent communication, whether it's passive or active. And what does that mean? Active is you're making announcements. This is how our endowment's doing. You bring it up in different different forums. But in a passive way, it's incredibly important as well. So how many masjids that have, or organizations that have endowments, clearly articulate what is happening to that endowment on their websites? Are there annual donor reports that are going out? Is there that additional transparency? Because on the flip side, when I speak to donors that are willing to give meaningful dollars, they'll say, well, I gave some money, but I don't know what happened to it. And so it's not that they don't have the money. It's not that they don't want to give the money, but there is a lack of transparency that is impairing some level of trust in that relationship. And so one of the aspects as we think about how to grow in this like education bucket is incredibly important to think about, okay, how am I being intentional about ensuring that I am being as transparent as possible as a means to build credibility and trust with the community. Irrespective of the size of the donor, everyone deserves to have that transparency in terms of what is happening. So how do we create momentum, right? So I'm going to be a little bit more tactical here, right? Just to give like different ideas of what other organizations have done successfully, right? So if you are have a new endowment or reigniting the endowment that you have, there are strategies that you can use to build momentum, right? And so again, I'm going to use a lot of corporate jargon here, right? But one of the things that they'll teach you in like a marketing class is like there are first movers, there's people in the middle, and then there are laggards, right? And different people look for different signals in terms of what will motivate them to move, right? And so similarly, as you think about your own campaign design to engage community or your own community, one of the things that works well is doing it in a staged way, right? So you start small, you focus on the folks that you know are quote unquote your friendlies, and you really engage them in a meaningful way. And those are opportunities where you can get those early commitments or contributions from those folks. And then you start to build from there, right? So you have that seed phase, then you maybe have a smaller public launch in the community, and then it starts to be integrated and sustained as part of your overall communication approach as an organization, right? And so you want to kind of start, walk, and run as an organization as you think about how you want to communicate this to your donors and your stakeholders. The other piece I kind of touched on is consistent engagement. So this is not a one and done project, right? Rather, we established the endowment, we put some money in it, khalas, right? We're gonna, inshallah, and when we open our eyes in 25 years, it's gonna be so much money and everything will be great. It doesn't work that way, right? And this kind of goes back to that original, the 3 circles, right? If this is not part of your strategy, if it is not part of your board meetings, if it's not part of the general body updates on a regular basis, it is not going to move forward. So if you believe that this is the right tool, if you believe that the financial sustainability and resiliency of your organization is paramount, which I know all of you do, then it only makes sense to make sure that this is integrated and it has a consistent schedule like everything else, right? A lot of our schedules are like, okay, for Ramadan, we have a Ramadan fundraiser, and then mid-year we do this and we do that. Similarly, at a different cadence, you can do the same thing for your endowments as you think about the endowment focus. And this is where, if we draw from the Princeton example and other organizations as well, is having a focused team, whether it's a subcommittee, whether it's a separate board, whatever it is, but having a focused set of folks that are specifically tasked to this is where you start to see a lot of momentum, right? Who is your internal champion within your organization that is going to be able to drive this on a consistent basis? Because that is the only way this happens. So this is the major opportunity I think we have in how do we unlock that $500,000 question, right? How do we get, and in fact, I think it's a lot greater, but how do we unlock that net new money into the organization? Because on an annual cash basis, it's very difficult to get that extra 100,000 or 500,000 or $1 million, whatever you're going for. And if you look at the demographics in America, and there's lots of different reports on this. This was done by Cerulli, which is a very reputable analytics firm. But over the next, call it 20 years, there is over $84 trillion and that is in motion, right? Money moving from the older generation and moving over. And that money will then get divided through different charitable causes. It will go to different families, but it is money that is in motion, right? And so, alhamdulillah, our community doesn't lack resources, right? We have, mashallah, tabarakallah, quite a bit of wealth in our community, and we're part of that stat as well, in a meaningful way, right? And so for me, as I think about our communities, it is incredibly important, even if you think that, hey, how in the world are we going to raise $1 million, $5 million, $10 million when we struggle to raise $500,000 or $1 million a year? I want to push everyone here to be your own visionary for your community. What are the possibilities? And in order for us to really be successful, the work has to start today. And a lot of the presentations that were shared earlier today and yesterday as well was really about how do we build the right infrastructure such that when the moment comes, we are ready to catch that opportunity. And this is one of the biggest opportunities in my mind, one of the most underutilized opportunities in the American Muslim community today. And if we do our jobs right, inshallah, our communities will be able to benefit from it in a meaningful way. And so how do we do that, right? How do we unlock legacy giving, right? I'd say number one is let's demystify it a little bit, right? It doesn't have to be as complicated sometimes as it may seem, right? And so this is where, from an education perspective, you don't want to dump everything on everyone all at once, right? And so as part of your collateral, your approach to the community, where you're bringing in kind of small nuggets of information and sharing it on a consistent and regular basis so that people start to build a base of knowledge. Number two, there is an opportunity at the board level to identify opportunities, right? So as you're talking to your respective communities and donors and things like that, there are ways for you to spot opportunities where someone may want to be able to give in a meaningful way from a legacy perspective. You know that they really care about your organization. They have been a major contributor over time. They may have other assets that you know of, and they may not know about the opportunities that they could give maybe in a tax advantage way to your organization. And those are opportunities for your board to spot. And I'll kind of share more details on how to think about that. And the third one I mentioned just a second ago in terms of designating someone on the team. And so as you think about what are the vehicles to give, right? There's a lot. But the most common ways, right? One is just through bequest, right? Someone in there, we'll see how in their will and their trust, they designate a certain amount of a percentage or a certain amount to the organization. That to me is table stakes in terms of what we should be doing. The other opportunities we have are in terms of like 401k, if the person has a life insurance, designating the organization as a beneficiary or a partial beneficiary there. There are tax advantages to doing that. The third thing, and I'll touch on this a little bit more, is around charitable trusts. And so there's lots of different iterations of this. But as a basic example, I'll give my father as an example, right? MashaAllah, he's got a lot of rental homes, and I'm sure we got plenty of rental home folks here as well, right? You could put your rental home in a charitable trust where you get the immediate tax deduction, but you continue to benefit from the income because you need the income to live. But as soon as you die, that asset then is turned over to that charity, for example, right? And so that's just one example, but there are lots of ways for us to be creative, and I'm not saying this is in a way that we have to be like we're coming up with something that's new, but these are concepts that other communities use really well, and we should be using all the tools that are available that allow us to give in a way that works within the confines of that individual's challenges or needs, but also maximizes from a tax perspective what is available legally in our law, right? Other people are doing it. We shouldn't be paying any more tax than the next guy. And so those are some of the things that we would want to make sure that as part of that campaign, as you're engaging with those communities, or your community rather, you're being able to make sure that that's a clear understanding of what the options are. And so, I won't go through this, but part of the education that would happen at the board level, and when I was talking about how to spot opportunities, is really thinking about, okay, you know your community the best, you know who your donors are the best, you generally have an idea, especially for your larger donors, maybe what the source of their income is. And so there's a number of gift vehicles that can make sense, sometimes multiple gift vehicles, right? And so this, as an organization, is where you start to get smart on, okay, if this is the situation, these are the potential vehicles that would likely make sense, right? And so now we're not saying that every board has to be a financial expert, because you won't be able to have every board to be a financial expert on everything every time. What I'm advocating is that you start to identify at a baseline level what are some of the opportunities and how to start to think about what are the tools that we can use depending on the situation. Similarly, as we do on our annual donations, right? You say, okay, we'll use a recurring donation here. This will be a one-time gift here. We will want to pledge over here. There's different tools that we're using to be able to engage the community, and this is no different. It's just a bigger tool set that we can use in order to engage our communities in a more meaningful way. All right. This is where the rubber kind of meets the road is execution. MashaAllah, tabarakallah, we have a lot of strategists in all of our boards. They can opine on lots of things, and may Allah reward them for the benefit they bring. But at the end of the day, you can have the money, you can have the intent, but if you don't execute on that intent, it doesn't materialize into anything. And so this is where we've seen things kind of break down, where you think that you should be the recipient of an asset, but you actually don't end up being the recipient of that asset. And so particularly around, bequests and estates and things like that, it is really important to help those community members drive to execution. And so one of the opportunities that we have, and mashallah, we have a lot of people in our community, whether they're estate planning attorneys or tax attorneys and other professionals from a financial perspective, that I would strongly recommend your community start to partner with. And in particular, if you are using a third party to manage your endowment, those are resources that you can use to help at least facilitate some of those connections for your donors, right? In some cases, people already have a person that they trust and be able to execute on that. But it's incredibly important for us to have the mechanisms to be able to follow up and drive to execution, because ultimately that's what's required here, right? So from a strategy perspective, number one. Number two, the education, which is where you're going to spend the bulk of your time. But once you get kind of to that final stretch, that final thing, you've got to be able to help people take it over the line, because like many things, we all know that we're going to die, but no one thinks they're going to be tomorrow. It will be them tomorrow, right? And so this is something that often gets kind of pushed to the side. And it is incredibly important when someone comes to you, you're able to act on that intent and that interest at that moment. So the most important thing out of all of this is get started, right? You don't have to be perfect, but it is important to get started and really identify what the opportunity here and start to kind of break it down and look at it, right? And so one of the things that, that I have just as a recap of what we talked about, right, is you've got to define that purpose. What is the endowment going to do? It's not about more money. It is, what is this really going to do? Build the vision for the community, inspire the next generation of donors as well, in terms of why should we support this? Why will the masjid or the school or the relief organization or the political advocacy group, why will they be the right stewards of this capital, not just from a financial perspective, but from the amana of having that capital and being able to do something meaningful, right? That is where you want to be able to really spend time, and no one else can do that for you. You have to do that as a board. You have to do that as a leader of your respective community. And then it's starting being very, very tangible in what your goals are, right? So one of the things I say is set a target. And what that means is I'll ask, okay, what is your target for your endowment? And someone will say, oh, well, we want to get as much money as possible, inshallah. That's the goal, get as much money as we can. And so one of the things that I push back on is that it's incredibly important to have a real target that's backable by something, right? And so in my first example I gave you the $1 million endowment that took 4% out and got $40,000, right? And they have a $1.2 million budget. Well, you could say that part of our goal from a financial target is to be able to cover 80% of our annual operating budget, which would then translate to a $20 million endowment or more, depending on the specific factors, right? And so you want to be able to come up with tangible targets that are backed by something that someone can really get behind. Because when you start to do that, it's the same way that the psychology works when you look at, hey, we have a new expansion and we need $5 million. You usually get exactly $5 million. You don't get $6 million, you don't get $7 million, you get $4.89 million, and then someone has to fill it in with the loan or something, right? And so similarly with the endowment, we've got to, as you think about the strategy, the target is actually really important too, as you think about how to set the psychology in the right way, but also have goals that you can then track against, right? Okay, if we have a $20 million goal over the next 15 years, what does that translate to, right? How do we break down this problem? How do we make this into a manageable thing? And how do we make this into a systematic approach in terms of how we engage with the community? And then the other piece, we talked about the segmentation, the collateral, training the board. And I think this is where I would, last point I'll focus on is the people, right? So when you're being entrusted with the community's assets, there is a lot of pressure that you have as a leader of an organization. And so if we want to be the place where people are comfortable giving those assets, comfortable giving that money, we as a board or as a leadership have to be very comfortable about what does the endowment do and be able to articulate at a baseline level what it is. Like everything can't be outsourced. There are certain things you just have to know as a board. And so having that training and spending that time and aligning internally will be very, very important in order to be able to come out the gates and have a consistent message such that all of the community members understand what the goals are, and ultimately, inshallah, you'll be successful. So that's the formal. I'll open up for Q&A, but as I mentioned before, right, so one of the things that we've done is we've built a blueprint. Feel free to email blueprint@investOneWell.com, and we're happy to send this to anyone. I mean, my personal goal, and I would say of our firm, is really how do we help the community move forward? It doesn't have to be me or anybody else that's doing it, but ultimately, what are the things that we need to do, whether it was the challenge that we're hearing today or anything else in the future. We have to come together, we have to make this a priority, and we have to believe and have the vision that this is something, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, will be able to allow us to be successful in this country, inshallah, in the future. Jazakallah khair. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the presentation. I see that we are using the word endowment and waqf. And, looks like, they're semantics, but there is really a difference between waqf and endowment. It's exactly like in Islamic finance, we use murabaha, we use musharaka, and the Western language left those as they are because they are term refer to something very, very specific. Even the two professors of Islamic finance book, Law, History, and Finance by Frank Vogel and Samuel Hayes, when they authored one of the most eloquent books that describe Islamic finance, they left the term as they are. And I think we are here as a Muslim community, we need to clearly leave the waqf and refer to it as a waqf, because a waqf is an endowment, but the endowment is not a waqf. And there are two reasons for that. The first one, that the waqf emphasize on preserving the asl, the origin. And that's how the scholars, they describe it, habsul asli wa tasbilul manfa'a. The endowment doesn't put emphasis on that. So you can pierce the asl anytime by having, like most of these endowments, they require, for example, 5-6%. In the endowment, in the waqf, the asl becomes sacred, like it is something really sinful to pierce, and there are so much regulations for it. The second distinction between the endowment and the waqf, that the waqf is not just legally binding to follow the intent, it is actually religiously bounding. So it is really a fiduciary duty, and that's why the scholar said, وَشَرْطُ الْوَاقِفِ كَنَصِّ الشَّارِعِ. And that's really a very heavy statement, because when you say كَنَصِّ الشَّارِعِ, means literally almost as Quran and Sunnah. And that's why the waqf gained its power and survived centuries, correct? Until this moment, when any society wants to argue with the waqf, they get the best of the minds and elites to sit down and be careful, because no one would like to go in a head collision with the intent of the waqif, who stated in the document that those who help me achieve my intent, I ask Allah to bless them, and who stands against it, I will hold them responsible in front of Allah at the day of judgment. That's very, very powerful. And I think as part of educating our Muslim community, we need to be proud of using the term waqf, because waqf is different than endowment. So this is something like I want to emphasize in these two distinction between waqf and endowment. And we should not feel any problem Americanizing the waqf and leave it as it is, because I think years from now, it will become recognized brand like halal, like murabaha, like sukuk now. So use the word waqf rather than endowment if you are communicating with the Muslims to deliver the concept. Thank you.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Thank you for the advice on that. I think all those points are very well taken. I think broadly for one of the things that I would say is top of mind for most communities is that what are the things that we need to do to make the work that we're doing financially sustainable and resilient, right? And so I think actually it was in the slide from the brother from Nate actually that I liked was he was kind of making distinctions in terms of how we thought about the real estate and the assets that you never want to sell or that you want to hold on as much as possible. But there's also these financial aspects of how do we use financial tools and the resources within our community to be able to then bring about meaningful financial growth and resiliency. So not that we are just sustaining what we're doing, but how do we take it to the next level, right? That to me is what's important here. So I certainly appreciate that, and I as you all, right? I'm not the expert on everything here. I've also learned quite a bit in terms of from a historical perspective, and appreciate those comments. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Brother, thank you for this presentation. I wanted to applaud you for the job that is being done. I live in Maryland, Howard County, and I have a soft heart for Pakistan because I had an adopted mother that passed away. For some information, maybe we don't know, the biggest donor in Howard County Community College is the best community college in the country, by the way, is being funded by a Muslim brother, up to 90+%. And this has been going on for the last 45 years. So my point here is how can we leverage the resources that we have within us? MashaAllah, the Muslim community, we have been blessed with wealth, no matter where we're at, and especially here in the United States. I am specialized in pre- and post-retirement. It's not beautiful. I get a little bit emotional because we are leaving a lot on the table because he just explained it to us. We can leverage that. We can put it to work. But how we can do it, and to answer the other gentleman over there, we need to have a spot on the table. It's as simple as that. Equity, private equity, all of these financial solutions that we have company. We can have a say in Wall Street. What are we doing to have that spot? Because we can design it, Sharia law, whatever we want it, custom design based on our needs. And I want to invite your institution that mashallah is doing an amazing job. And then how we can basically, because let's be honest with each other, we work here and anybody who has a salary has a 401k, a pension, a TPS, right? That means there is a transition that is happening. In December 2030, the last baby boomer will turn 65. That is a transfer of 70 trillion in asset, and brother, that information is exactly aligning with what he shares. What does it say? It says that that transfer is going to happen, whether we want it or not. It's happening, and it's going to happen with or without the community. So the blueprint that is here offering to us, I think we have to put it, and one of the only way we can get our community to come into one is unity. We are not united. I can tell you it's a business, whether we like it or not. Raising fund is a business. And when we want it, that's why the works and the endowment are dying down. Why? Because we cannot renew. And the only way we can grow it is when we can put those funds to work. And how we can do it is to reach out to a bigger mass that we can serve. And that bigger mass, I can represent the diaspora. We are not present in the Muslim community, right? We have the African American that are not present in the Muslim community. That is a basic, I think, that we can start with. And then the only way we can do is to education, through education, because it's hard. The donation, I have never seen bigger donors than the Muslim donors. But what is it happening with the money that is being given? If we can have transparency, we can have monthly, we have design a platform where every single person can come and see that something is happening and adding value to you, to me, it's never going to die. So I'm inviting, our community and the leaders to be open to this, because we are, whether we like it or not, a stranger, and I was not surprised because of the announcement that was happening. Where I knew it was coming is a NIFA. NIFA is a very old association that has been here since 1899. We need to be there because all of the stakeholders that will have to change the law on our advantage. I am inviting you, brother, to join that association because once we have it, we are having a seat on the table. So, assalamu alaikum, and thank you for the job.
Wa alaikum assalam tullah. Thank you. Jazakallah khair.
Yes. She said really quick, so I'll be quick. Thank you. On the practical side, a lot of work to execute everything, but you didn't mention budget. How do organization allocate budget to execute all of this? What's a fair or appropriate budget? Is it based on percentage? Is it a fixed fee? And where does the fund come from? Is it coming from the Waqf fund or coming from the operating masjid?
Yeah.
So thank you.
Fantastic question. I would say a real question, right, that communities face. Before I answer that, I would say that the prerequisite to this, and I was talking to this with another brother earlier, it really comes down to mindset and how you think about the work that you're putting into the community. And so I would say that in some cases, there is a scarcity mindset or there's a direct return on investment mindset. And, personally, I think we have to think more of an abundance perspective. We have to be more optimistic about what the opportunities are. And we have to be willing to invest in the resources that we need, whether it's this or anything else. And so I think some of it's been borne by a lot of the true scarcity that was early on in the community, and we had to really put duct tape together and get things together. But mashallah, we're further along than we were 30 years ago, right? And so what is the right budget, right? What is the right amount? I wouldn't say there's a specific dollar amount or a specific percentage as a result of, based on, your annual whatever. But that's something that we can talk about, at an individual level, but it's something that you have to be serious about to invest in. And so what does that investment look like? It's actually not that much if you really think about it. In terms of from a legal perspective, it could be a few $1,000s from a marketing or other collateral that you need, or compliance perspective could be a few grand. But when you're talking about budgets that are in the millions, these are small amounts. The other thing that we didn't really talk about, it wasn't in the scope of this conversation, but I think one of the areas that we could really benefit from are having dedicated or fractional development officers within our organizations. Very rarely do I see any sort of dedicated development person, right? Because again, it goes back to the mindset where I've seen it's no, if you're going to fundraise for the masjid, you just have to do it as a volunteer. You can't get paid for it. That's the worst thing ever, right? So if we want to be serious, about donor stewardship, if we want to be serious about the work that needs to happen, that's one of the resources that I would recommend folks to look into, because those are things that can really pay off as long as you have the right long-term mindset to do it. Because the mechanics of setting up the endowment piece are actually the easy part and doesn't cost that much. It's really the time and the effort and the focus that is the real source of commitment.
Jazakallah khair for the presentation. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, your family, and your efforts. I mean, so there are two things that throughout the presentation I believe were implied, and I just kind of wanted you to expand on them if you could. Number one is donor profiles. You had mentioned, the donor pyramid, but actually how to create individual profiles to help understand how to target those specific donors.
Yeah.
The second thing that if you could touch on it as well that I think is really important, you had talked about creating annual reports and things like that. And I think a lot of that goes in hand with transparency, which goes hand in hand with documentation. So maybe you can touch on what is a good way to make sure that we are documenting things appropriately so that we can, it's never a problem to have too much documentation, right? Yeah. It's just understanding what is a meaningful presentation of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think someone mentioned no one's ever been communicated too much, right? So on the first one, on the pyramid, right? And so, the way that I would guide someone to think about that is that there are certain personas or types of individuals within your community, right? And so that's one construct, but I wouldn't limit myself to just those buckets, right? The whole point of it is that if you're more of psychology of the donor, it's what are the motivations of this person and how do they think, and what are their specific circumstances that dictate how they give, right? And so that often can be driven off of age, that could be driven off of the profession that they're in, that can be driven off of, hey, they were a business owner and had a major liquidity event. And so for different types of profiles, you have to have a different approach, right? And so I think that's kind of the idea here, right? And so what I would say is that as you introspectively look at your own community, you'll probably come up with your own buckets, right? It doesn't have to be that, right? But I think it's really thinking about who those people are and being able to communicate to them in the right way. I've had this conversation a lot where someone will say, no, I know my community better. They would actually respond to this environment or this type of event better than that type of event. And I'm like, that's fantastic, because I don't know who your community is, right? You know who the community is, they trust you, and here are the resources how to get there. The second point around the donor, how do you create transparency, right? And so here is where I would recommend, right, not to be self-serving for myself, but in general, right, this is where it is very beneficial to leverage different professionals and resources that do this work all day and every day. So for example, on reporting, as your endowment grows, inshallah, there will be more investments and different things happening. To be able to effectively have a comprehensive report and pull all of that together is a lot of work to do, right? But it is an imperative step that you have to do in order to be able to, on a regular basis, be able to provide that transparency. And so I would counsel people to leverage the right resources or pay the right resources to be able to support these things, because eventually, if you're just looking at it from a quote ROI, it will pay off, right? But again, it comes down to that mindset and making sure that you really believe that this is important, because alhamdulillah, all the people that I speak to on these different boards, I would say, mashallah, through and through, everyone has very good intentions, really cares about the community, and wants to do the right thing. I step on the other side, I talk to the donor, they say, well, I'd like that person, but I don't know what's going on, right? And I go back to the board member, and board member saying, I'm so busy, I don't know I have all these things, I have this going on, that going on, and I'm doing my absolute best. And I believe both of them, right? And so this is an opportunity where we can say, okay, this is the challenges that we're having as a community. And by the way, there is a solve for this. And I am convinced that we have the resources in this community. I'm very optimistic that if presented in the right way, the right people will step up and make those investments. So that would be my advice.
I guess there are two things there.
Yeah.
What type of resources would I look for?
Okay. What type of resources would you look for?
What type of resources would I look for? And the other thing that I think is also very important that has to do with this is we're spending a lot of time about donating money, but I think donating time is also very important, and that you can create a different set of profiles for that.
Yeah. So in terms of resources, the biggest resource is the board's strategic time and effort in terms of one, coming up with the strategy, two, engaging with the actual donors. Now, behind the scenes, what is the resourcing required, right? And so I would say from a marketing perspective or a collateral perspective, there is content generation that needs to happen, right? And so, again, there are, and we'll have it in our blueprint as well, free resources that have pre-made presentations that you can use, put your logo in it, and go, right? Like, there's not 100 ways to make a charitable trust. People have already done it, and now it's really just how do we put it in the context of our community and do that, right? So there's the collateral resource that's required. The other resource that it doesn't cost us any money, but again, this is around how do we build the right connections, is on the execution front, are we partnering with the right professional resources within our community? We have attorneys, we have tax professionals and things like that. We should engage those people and allow them to kind of enable the execution part of it. The other resource that's required, I would say, is from an investment like management perspective. And so I would, again, counsel folks to lean on experts, but also use your own experts in the community for guidance and strategy, right? They don't have to actually do the work, but they do understand like what good looks like, and you should lean on those folks to be able to make some of those decisions. All right, thank you. Jazakumullah khair.